All right, thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Webb, and I am the director of the Fair Chance Criminal Justice Project at the North Carolina Justice Center. I am excited to be here with you today and to facilitate this important conversation. So let me be the first to welcome you to this community conversation, which is called Looking Ahead, Decarceration in 2025 and Beyond. So this community conversation is the last one in a series of events that we have held this year, 2024, as part of our fifth and final annual Visual for Freedom and Racial Justice. As many of you know, the purpose of the visual was to highlight and address mass incarceration and state prison safety issues, while we provided a public high-profile platform to uplift the needs, calls, and voices of those mostly Black and Brown people who are currently languishing in our North Carolina state prisons. During the end of 2024, members of our coalition, which includes both organizations and individuals, stood in collective visual outside the governor's mansion each day from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. from December the 11th, 2024 to January 1st, 2025. Although the visual is technically over for this year, our work to decarcerate North Carolina prisons continues. And so to get more information about the goings on of our coalition, we encourage you to visit our coalition website, which is decarceratenowNC.com. I'm gonna take a pause here and I will pass it to Tim Young-Jackson, who is our communication specialist, to give some housekeeping instructions and technical directions.
Thanks, Laura. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll be real quick, but basically in the Zoom format, you always will have access to the Q&A sections of any point in time during our panelists' conversations. Feel free to pop in there, ask some questions. Feel free to utilize the chat. If you have any issues with the Zoom call at all, or if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to utilize that. We will have a couple polling questions that will come up during the conversation. Feel free to answer those to help us kind of get a better idea of your knowledge about the carceral system and how our panelists can best work with you. Okay, that's it for me. I'll pass back to Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. So just to reiterate, today's discussion is called Looking Ahead, Decarceration in 2025 and Beyond. The conversation will be a conversation that reflects on each one of the panelists' great work from 2024. And it will also give our panelists an opportunity to give a preview of what their work may look like in 2025 and beyond. The panelists will give a preview of this work and couch it in the insight about the current social and political climate. We believe that this conversation is timely because of all the recent transitions that have happened in our political landscape, including our 2025 legislative session, which officially started today, but will become more active later this month. The induction of a new governor, Josh Stein, who took office on January 1st. The induction of a new secretary of the Department of Adult Corrections, who was sworn in on January 6th. So with all this transition, there is possibility for some possible change in the coming future. So we have the honor of having several advocates and subject matter experts who will speak with us today about their work. We will hear a video recording from Christy Puckett. We also will hear from Dr. Craig Waleed, and then we will also hear from Lyle May. Through this conversation, as Tim said, feel free to put your questions in the question and answer box. We'll be monitoring that box, and we'll be answering questions as soon as possible. As Tim also mentioned, we will also be hosting live polls where we can gather insights and make this conversation interactive. So first, we'll start off with a poll. And this poll will be about your understanding of solitary confinement. So I will pass it to Tim to launch that poll.
All right, the poll should be live, so people can feel free to answer that in your own time. But I will share those results with you all once we get those results in. Thank you.
All right. So while that poll's launched and while you're filling that out, we'll continue to move forward. And so first, we're going to take a look at the advocacy work that is happening to improve conditions inside of prisons. We'll be looking specifically at solitary confinement and advocacy work around death row. So first, we're going to start with Dr. Waleed, who is leading the statewide campaign to end solitary confinement in North Carolina and is a strong advocate for disability rights in North Carolina. Dr. Waleed, can you provide an overview of solitary confinement and what work that you and other advocates are doing to address it?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for the introduction, and thank you to your agency for inviting me to speak. Um, but yeah, solitary confinement is a torturous form of imprisonment. I'll start with that. It's a torturous form of imprisonment where individuals are isolated from virtually all human contact for anywhere from 22 to 24 hours a day. Um, Solitary is often arbitrarily used as a response to rule violations or to protect vulnerable individuals. You know, they call it protective custody, but it's all solitary confinement. It has many different euphemisms, but we're going to just continue to call it what it is, solitary confinement. It's also used to, I guess, manage behavior that might be deemed disruptive or dangerous. But again, it's really difficult to tell. But individuals in solitary confinement are typically confined to a very small cell, about the size of a parking spot or a very small bathroom, about 6 by 9, with minimal or no access to natural light, limited physical activity, little or no social interaction of any quality. Uh, of any type of quality or any type of a meaningful human contact, as well as a lack of programming or rehabilitation. Um, should I go on, or is that it? I mean, I don't want to take up all the time, but there's more I can say.
You have some more time to.
Okay, so cool. So, you know, solitary confinement, people typically will spend anywhere from a day, a few hours, to maybe even decades in solitary confinement. I think the person who spent the longest was a gentleman named Alfred Woodfox. I think he spent 40 years in solitary confinement. I forget the state. I want to say Pennsylvania, but I could be wrong. Um, Solitary confinement is also like the conditions in there is like very harsh. Like people have very limited sensory deprivation or very little sensory stimulation. So they're under sensory deprivation and they have, I think I mentioned, limited access to programming and recreation and often no access to programming or rehabilitative services. And at the same time, there's like mental and physical health effects of solitary confinement. Research is like tons of research that shows that prolonged isolation causes severe psychological effects. It can either cause them or exacerbate pre-existing psychological effects, such as, you know, like anxiety, depression, hallucination, and even suicidal ideation. And there's also physical health issues like hypertension, um, organ damage, and weakened immune systems. And this particular piece really stands out to me because I didn't say, but I am a survivor of solitary confinement. I've been out of prison as of December that just passed makes 27 years I've been out, but I spent two 30-day sentences in solitary confinement. Many years later, after getting out of solitary confinement, I'll disclose to you that I've had large organ failure, or troubles like with my intestines and with my heart. And I've had to have like major medical interventions. And no one else in my family has undergone uh, prison or these types of medical interventions. And so I think that my exposure to solitary confinement really has probably contributed to some of my health challenges. Nevertheless, I'm alive and well. But I think I'll end there because
Yeah,
I think this is your
thank you,
question.
Doc, for that information about solitary confinement and the effects it has. And thank you for sharing your personal stories. So I know that you, through the In Solitary Confinement North Carolina campaign, are doing a lot of work to combat or to end solitary confinement. And so we would love to hear about the work you're doing and any next steps that the campaign plans to take in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, right on. So, some of the stuff that we're doing, one of the major things that we have been doing, is working on awareness and advocacy. So, we look to continue to educate policymakers, correctional staff, as well as the public about the devastating effects of solitary confinement on individuals and communities and families. And so, I really also work at amplifying the voice of formerly incarcerated individuals to help shed light on the lived experiences of isolation. And I think that spreading awareness is so important because in our country, often we find people who are raising sand or raising hell or just making a lot of protests about, say, human rights violations that are happening in other countries, but not really paying attention to the human rights violations of solitary confinement and torture that are happening in our states and federal prisons. But some of the other stuff we're looking to start doing more work on is policy reform. So we want to begin this year collaborating with legislators and additional advocacy groups, as well as community stakeholders to continue to push for policies that limit or eliminate the use of solitary confinement in our prisons and jails. And as a matter of fact, we have a rough draft of a legislative piece that we plan to push forward this year. And so we emphasize, really aligning with state practices, with or emphasize that our state aligns with practices with the international human rights standards that call for limiting solitary confinement for no more than 15 days, and this is known as the Mandela rules. And I think that pretty much sums it up as far as our work goes right now. But I'll end with also sharing that I work at facilitating or holding community discussions. I've done many discussions on college campuses and at community settings about solitary confinement in churches and things of that nature. And also, I'll give a plug that this weekend on the 11th, we'll also be screening a film called The Strike, which is about the solitary confinement strike that took place in Pelican Bay. Um, and so we'll be screening that film and then having a panel discussion with some survivors of solitary confinement. And so again, it's all in the vein of trying to raise awareness with the hopes of eventually influencing legislation down the line.
Yeah, thank you for that share out. And we will include information about that screening in the follow-up packet. We do have a question. Would it be possible to end the practice of solitary confinement instead of keeping this barbaric practice in place?
I think so, yes. We have seen examples of solitary confinement being I don't think it's been totally eliminated, but it's been done more humanely. We've seen it in some states around the country who are working on implementing more humane forms of isolation or separation, whereas people are not being kept inside of a cell for 22 or 24 hours a day, where people are allowed to go outside, where people are allowed to access programming and other types of psychological, emotional, stimulating materials that won't cause a deterioration of their person. So to sum off or to finalize my answer to that, I think that we can have separation and isolation without punishing or harming people. We can do it safely. So that's my response to that question.
All right. Thank you so much. And so now I'm going to pass it to Tim to publish the answers from the first poll and to issue the second poll. And directly after that poll, the second poll gets started, we will hear from Lau May, who is a prison journalist, scholar, and advocate who is currently incarcerated in Central Prison on death row.
Thanks, Laura. Just going to launch our next poll, just asking about your familiarity with death row in North Carolina. But I will pass it over to Keisha and Lyle.
So Lau, could you tell us about your recent advocacy related to death row?
Sure. I'd real briefly like to take a moment to thank the doctor for uplifting the name of Albert Woodfox, who recently passed away, and urge all of you to read his book called Solitary, which details his life of 44 years in solitary confinement. My advocacy specific to those on death row and recently for our bid to get Governor Roy Cooper to grant clemency to the 89 petitions that were submitted to him was kind of not something I expected to be able to do, but was certainly willing to when offered that opportunity. And when it came about, I met Keisha Mallett and April Barber and Tim, and really began to understand the work that's done in the community to help facilitate commutations and clemency bids. And one of the things that I discovered in doing that is the absolute need for the public to understand not just the power and authority that the governor has as a gatekeeper of the carceral state, but that it doesn't end with him. That even though we pursue clemency through the governor, there are a lot of different layers that we have to go through in order to reach his ear. And when that occurs, I think it's that much more important to involve these different layers of people in these kinds of discussions and these community, Zoom calls, so that they have a better understanding for, the public advocacy and support that's going around to not only get people off death row, but out of solitary confinement and out of prison from these death by incarceration sentences. I'd also like to bite on something the doctor said in terms of torture, and that's this idea that people who are sentenced to death face psychological torment from the moment that a prosecutor pursues the death penalty to a jury, recommending death as a sentence, and then it being pronounced by the judge. Throughout all of our time on death row, and in North Carolina's death row is different from a number of other states in that we are a congregate confinement facility, in that we have access out of our cells for the majority of the day, so we're able to interact with one another over a period of time. But I have to tell you that even though we have that ability to come out of our cell,
this call is from a North Carolina correctional facility.
That prolonged incarceration of decades under the threat of death is a form of torture, and that no matter how free you might think a particular penal environment, it does not negate the fact of the actual impact of that punishment. So not only does it not remove the idea of torture, even if we have not had an execution in North Carolina since 2006, that threat is pervasive. It occurs every time another state carries out an execution. It occurs every time executions are discussed in the media. It occurs even with the pronouncement by Josh Stein shortly after his swearing in as governor that he supports the death penalty. And that's difficult to reconcile, especially after going through a circumstance where a number of us had to submit these petitions and had genuine hope that they would be granted. And when only 15 were granted, we then had to readjust our vision for that future. So one of the things that requires is to kind of pivot from the moment where you thought you had a chance to the moment where that chance was rejected to, okay, well, what are my next steps? And in terms of that advocacy, in terms of advocating for future clemency petitions, especially from death row, I think we benefit from greater organization. A number of the things that we discussed as a coalition was that we need to reach out to other gatekeepers of the carceral state. As I mentioned, the governor is not the only person with all of the power, although he does have quite a bit. Also necessary in this conversation, and this applies also to solitary confinement, is the Attorney General and the Secretary of Corrections. These are both individuals, both power holders who can have a significant sway in the decision of a governor to grant clemency, but also in the decision of others throughout the criminal legal system to reduce sentences, to get people out of solitary confinement who have been there for years, if not decades, and to minimize the need to dehumanize those who are incapacitated by incarceration. So that is probably the biggest takeaways from the advocacy and pursuit of clemency in 2024. And what 2025 looks like is much more of that, with greater research and organization and outreach to individual power holders, as well as a template that we can create that helps us organize the information around individual petitioners so that they're all kind of on the same page and they're much more digestible groupings of information, if you will. So those are some of my thoughts around clemency and petitions, especially that advocacy work that occurred and, you know, what the future could look like in North Carolina.
Thank you so much. And so the next question, if you can share, is how can people follow or support your advocacy work?
So probably the best way to do that is I have a website, lylesmay.com. You can sign up for a free newsletter there. You can find a lot of the articles and books that I've published. You can also maintain an awareness for the goings-on of what happens in the immediacy of the prison environment on death row, as well as different policies that I'm dissecting. One of the things that was previously mentioned is an effort to pursue legislation, and I also cover a lot of the politics in North Carolina, mostly because the criminal legal system is threaded through and through with politics, and it's important to understand who the power holders are, why they continue to be in office, and what it takes to really, maybe if not work with them, but get them to hear what it is we're saying and get them to realize that they absolutely have a responsibility beyond this idea of tough on crime and incapacitation through imprisonment. So that website, as well as, any brief, I wouldn't ordinarily recommend this, but I'm told that it is effective. A brief Google search of recent articles that I've done, ILC May will bring up any number of different articles. One in particular I would like to recommend is a co-authored law review that is going to be physically published this year, but was digitally published last year by NYU's School of Law, and that is the constitutionality of life under the credible threat of death by execution, the view from death row, where myself and the co-authors, Dr. Robert Johnson and Dr. Brittany Ripper, we dissect what it means to go through psychological torture under the threat of death and how very closely it aligns both with solitary confinement and life.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
There are no black and white lines. There is just a lot of gray areas where those punishments blend together, and certainly all experience that same form of psychological torture, and it is all something we should be fighting against.
Thank you so much, Val. And those that website is his website is posted in the chat for everyone to access and view. So
You
now,
have 30 seconds.
so now I'm going to pass it back to Tim to publish the responses from the second poll and then to release the third poll.
Yeah, it looks like we have a pretty diverse familiarity with death row and the advocacy around it. But I'll go ahead and launch our next poll, which is basically going to ask of what our audience thinks might be the biggest barriers to ending death row here in North Carolina. So I'll leave that open, but I'll pass it back to Laura to while the poll starts running.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So next we will hear about the advocacy work that is happening outside of North Carolina state prisons. And so for this, we will hear from Christy Puckett, who will come to us through a recording to talk about the vision behind the Vigil for Freedom, Racial Justice, and advocacy work that she is pushing on outside of North Carolina prisons.
Hey, 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 it's your girl, Christy Puckett, coming to you live and in vivo, this time from my bedroom in Charlotte, North Carolina, as we have concluded the Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice for this year. As you may or may not know, Governor Cooper recently commuted the sentences of 15 people, well-deserving people, on death row. And there were some pardons and other commutation actions, clemency actions that he took right at the end of his tenure, as well as he did some things right before Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve. He also commuted more sentences and provided relief for North Carolinians. These actions are significant because it is the most action that has been taken in recent history by any governor, Democrat or Republican. No one has done the work around death row that Governor Cooper has done historically in North Carolina. And so these actions are significant, and they would not have happened without the engagement of community advocates and policymakers, lawyers, community organizers, and people who deeply cared about the conditions inside of prisons and the conditions inside of other carceral spaces, including jails, ICE detention centers, and other, again, carceral spaces. So these clemency actions are an acknowledgement that our system, our criminal legal system, is deeply flawed. We know that there are racially disparate practices and policies that result in a racially disparate population that ensures that our prisons that are full of people are mostly Black, brown people, but 100% of the people there are poor, right? Well, maybe 99.9, but you get what I'm saying, right? And so our work over the last 5 years, has been to center those who have oftentimes been forgotten about, who only receive charity or goodwill during the holidays. And so we decided when we created the vigil for us to use what was already being done, that there are holiday boxes that are being given out inside of carceral spaces, that people may get free phone calls or more visits. There are things that happen around the holidays inside of carceral spaces that don't normally happen. And so when we created this particular tactic, we wanted to seize the moment of what was already happening. We knew Governor Cooper would be pardoning turkeys at some point, and we wanted him to pardon our people. And so we came together from the perspective of, excuse me, impacted people, but also allies who, again, deeply cared about people who were in jails and prisons and what could we do. And so we've done it, y'all. This message is a huge thank you, especially to my people who have lived behind the wall, who are currently behind the wall, who did not receive the relief. Thank you for engaging, continuing to engage, for not giving up, for practicing hope, because hope in these turbulent political times is definitely a practice. Thank you to all the other coalition members, all the other partners that we've had over the years. A huge shout out to the North Carolina Center. I can't even get it out. The North Carolina Justice Center, Keisha, Laura, and Tim for all the partnership that you all have displayed over the years. Could not have done this without Daniel Bowes. Could not have done this without the North Carolina Community Bail Fund. The ACLU was instrumental back in the day in getting this up and running. And Forward Justice, where I currently work, is a huge supporter of this effort over the last few years. The North Carolina Second Chance Alliance. I could name so many partners. Noel Nickel at the North Carolina Coalition for the Death Penalty, Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Sorry, I know I'm messing up that name. Emancipating C, Ben Finholt, Jamie Lau over at Duke. The list can go on and on of people that I could thank. But if I left you off, just charge it to my heart, charge it to my head, not my heart. And just know that this work has been deeply impactful. We want to make sure that any progress that we have made, we continue to understand that the progress so far has been made because we had people, again, who were directly impacted, people who worked their entire lives to ensure that we had some measure of freedom. This year's vigil was dedicated to Pop Hardy and Phyllis Grandma Hardy, who collectively spent over 50 years inside of prison, who got out and decided to dedicate their lives. They both passed in 2024, and we miss them deeply. And they were huge partners in this movement for freedom. And again, I just want to mention that there are still 30,000 men and women within the North Carolina prisons who are currently incarcerated. There are 121 people currently on death row. And though this particular tactic around sitting out in front of Governor Cooper's mansion around the Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday is ending, we know that we got a new governor, y'all. It's no more Roy Cooper. It's now Josh Stein. And this is a real opportunity for us to come together and to think about what would it look like to engage Governor Stein in clemency and in this type of advocacy. Again, stay encouraged, stay committed, stay tuned, stay involved with all of the organizations that you've been involved with. Continue to participate. Thank you for your time and commitment. All of the folks who've come and sat, who've watched, who've marched. Thank you to Patrick and his entire family, Patrick O'Neill and his entire family, for all of the laps that y'all have marched around that governor's mansion. Thank you to the Poor People's Campaign and Reverend Rob, and God rest his soul, Reverend Spearman, who we deeply miss. We've had some losses along the way. We've lost people who we love dearly, but we've also had some huge gains, and we wouldn't have had that without you all. I've been talking for a long time now. I'm going to head out, but just know that we will have some new emerging strategies to engage Governor Stein, and we're going to need you to help us. And remember that even though we won't be sitting outside during doing this particular tactic any longer, the vigil never ends, y'all. We will always remember those who are incarcerated. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I will see you next time.
Wow, that's a great way to end this section of our community conversation. Just want to echo Christy and say thank you to all the folks, many who are here or not on this call, who have helped make the Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice possible over the last 5 years. So, I want to echo Christy and just say thank you. So next I'm going to pause and see if Tim can release the results from the final poll, and then we will pivot to question and answer.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, it looks like the in terms of what people think might be the biggest barrier to ending death row here in North Carolina, it looks like we got a lot of answers around the public perception of death row. We also have conversations about lack of having a political champion, lack of having a stakeholder that might help kind of push the needle forward, and also the legal challenges that can involve. And so we do have one more poll I can throw at you all while we launch into our Q&A section. But this question is, do you feel that the social and political climate in North Carolina is becoming more or less conducive to justice reform? So as we are stepping into a new governorship here in North Carolina, as we're stepping into a new federal leadership situation here in the United States in general, how do we feel? What we feel is going to be the future of justice reform in relation to that?
Thank you so much, Tim. And also, if you could just repeat the instructions for asking questions, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, our chat function should be open and available if anyone wants to just put in anything in the chat section. We also have a Q&A button near the bottom of everyone's screens, where if you would like to ask an open-ended question of our panelists, you are please feel free to do so. But if I have one question kind of lying around that I can ask to Craig, Dr. Waleed, in terms of, as we're entering a new political landscape when it comes to, if we feel like the justice system and justice reform is conducive or less conducive, but how do you feel about 2025 and solitary confinement in terms of what barriers you have to expect?
Thanks for that question, Tim. I'm hopeful for 2025 because it seems as though we faced resistance from North Carolina DAC on some levels, it seems as though they've been making some quiet moves, so to speak, to change the way that solitary confinement is being carried out. At least on paper, they are. We've seen some different types of correspondence with more positive, more humanistic language included in it. However, I think that we'll continue to fight for more humane treatment in the solitary confinement units. And I say that because recently I received a letter from a gentleman who is in HCON, which is the highest security level of solitary in North Carolina's prisons. And he was saying, hey, man, we're not getting out for recreation. We're not getting proper medical attention. And as a matter of fact, this gentleman mentioned he has diabetes. He's not getting his correct medical attention. So I still think we have an uphill battle simply because of the culture of prisons and the culture of our society, which is still bent on punishing people despite them being full human beings.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We have a question in the chat, and Tim answered it, but I'm going to read it out loud just in case other folks have the same question. So is it possible to see the recordings of the first two community sessions? So Tim, can you provide an answer for that?
Yes, for anyone interested in our Community Conversation series, we do have a YouTube channel where we have been hosting all of these videos. So I just put a link in the chat. You can go there and you can view the conversations from the that we've had in the past, back in 2023, even all the way back to 2022. The conversations for this current vigil are still being edited, but those will be uploaded within a matter of weeks. So you will be contacted when those videos are up and available.
Great. Dr. Waleed, I do have a question for you. I think I failed to ask you before how people can follow and support your advocacy work. You did tell us about the screening, but is there ways folks can get involved with the campaign?
Thanks for that question, Laura. And yeah, you caught me in the middle of a mouthful of food. But yeah, I think the best way to get involved with us is to look us up at disabilityrights.org. And under the tab Our Work, you'll see, I forget the name of the tab, but I think it's to the criminal legal team, and it'll direct you to the work that we're doing. And you can sign our petition there. That's one way of getting involved. Or you can reach out to me again. through disability rights and see, and I can put you on our listserv so that you can begin attending our bi-monthly advisory committee meetings where I'm seeking advice from committee or from community members on the best way to move forward. And I say move forward because our work began with an effort to get Governor Cooper to implement the Mandela Rules, which was a recommendation by his task force for racial equity and corrections. But Cooper is no longer there. But still, in all, we need to see more humane treatment brought to our people who are incarcerated. So, moving forward, we want to figure out how, like Christy talked about, we can best engage the new governor in trying to bring about some relief for our people incarcerated. So, yeah, check me out on disabilityrights.org. And I think that's the best way to get engaged.
All right, thank you so much. Tim, I saw you just post another poll, so I'm gonna pass it back to you.
Yeah, sure. This one's an open answer, kind of a short answer question. So I want to give people a bit more time. But if you have participated in the vigil, if you've been part of these conversations, or if you've been there on the ground with us at the governor's mansion, either this year or in the past, we would love to kind of hear a little bit from you about, what advocacy efforts of the vigil you felt were most impactful to you and to the work. And so, if you can take the time to answer that, we would greatly appreciate it. But I'll leave that poll open so give people plenty of time to answer that. Keisha, is Lyle still on the call? I think I might have a question for him if he's still there.
I am.
Yeah, great. Great. I just have a question for you, just while during this time. But during your time as writing and kind of keeping yourself occupied during a situation, how do you keep yourself grounded?
This call is from a North Carolina correctional facility.
Sorry. Yeah. How do you keep yourself grounded and focused during this time? How do you kind of keep yourself moving forward?
The same way a swimmer doesn't want to drown. You keep moving. You want to make sure that everything you're doing is focused in a way that brings you closer to freedom, even if it's a small thing like maintaining your mental health and your physical health. And in here, that sounds like a no-brainer, but it's not. It's really not easy because you contend with not just your typical conditions of confinement, but the lack of adequate or nutritional food, and the subsequent pains of confinement. And largely that's about putting things in front of yourself, keeping your mind busy with things that strengthen it, that sharpen it. And for me, that's always been about reading. Reading is very fundamental in that, not just for people out there, but absolutely for people on the inside. And it matters what you read. For me, it was always about learning more of the environment, learning about where I live. This is my community for the foreseeable future, and I need to know it well enough to understand how it works, but also how it works against me. And to do that, it means reading about corrections. It means the criminal legal system. It means all of the various ways that it works and doesn't work, and how my experiences apply therein.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Thank you for sharing that with us. We also received a question in the Q&A box. The question is, there appears to be many organizations doing great work towards advocating for those on death row. Which organization is doing the heavy lifting advocating for death row members? And would it be beneficial to lend our efforts to improving their advocacy?
Is that for me?
Yes, or anyone. But
oh, sorry.
Yes.
So my understanding, there's kind of a few organizations that do a lot of advocacy. In terms of the heavy lifting for certainly clemency, it was the North Carolinians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, which is currently the director is Noelle Nickel. She would absolutely be a good person to contact as far as that goes. And on the legal front, it's a little murkier. There are actually two entities that were involved in the clemency process, and that would be the Center for Death Penalty Litigation with the two directors. One is Sheila Kenny, the other is Gretchen Engel, and then the Federal Habeas Unit. I'm not totally sure who the director is over there, but they're based out of Charlotte and relatively new. That's not to say that there aren't other entities, but probably the one that you'd want to get in contact with is Noelle Nickel at the North Carolinians for Alternatives to Death Penalty.
Thank you, Alan. And Noelle and Alternatives for the Death Penalty have been part of Decarcerate Now and See and part of the visual, I believe, since the inception. So thank you for lifting that up, along with Center for Death Penalty Litigation. So thank you so much. So as we turn to adjourn, I'm going to ask our panelists if there are any last thoughts that they want to share with the attendees, starting with Lau and then going to Dr. Waleed.
Well, I think it's important to remember that this kind of work is not easy. It is not fast. It is not always tangible, the results, but it's very important work, and I think it's all about the long haul. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And even when we're not successful, it's important to remember that those are the times where we have to put the most work in. And, pivot. Pivot is my word for 2025. Pivot because sometimes you fail and you have to get back up and you have to keep fighting.
Thank you so much for those final thoughts. And now I'll pass it to Dr. Waleed.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you for those wise words, Brother Lyle. I think it's important that we envision a future where prison systems will begin to prioritize rehabilitation and human dignity and community reintegration over just punishment. I think it's important that we, as a society, as well as those criminal legal systems, aim to create safer and more just systems that benefit everyone. And I think finally, or lastly, I would say that true justice requires us to recognize the humanity of every person, even those who are incarcerated. And again, that we challenge our systems to move beyond punitive approaches like solitary confinement and death row, and to focus more on rehabilitation, accountability, and healing.
Great. I think that's some wise words and a great way to end. And so with that, I'm going to adjourn the panel by thanking everyone, especially our incredible panelists, for sharing their expertise and perspectives with us today. I'm also going to thank our audience, and I see some longtime visual participants in the audience. So I want to thank you all for being here today and sticking with us throughout the years. Without you, this cannot be possible. So as I said before, even though this is the final year for the Vigil for Freedom and Racial Justice, the work to decarcerate North Carolina prisons continues. So we strongly encourage you to visit our website, decarceratenowandsee.org, to stay up to date with both decarceration and criminal justice reform efforts that are happening throughout the state. So with that, I want to bid you a great day and say thank you again.
Thank you too. Be well.